I believe we are live and the audio is working.
Hooray.
I believe so. Is it? I'm just going to presume the audio is working. If anyone's watching this and they can hear the audio, please let us know in the chat. This is the first ever episode of Extinction Rebellion East of England TV. And today's topic is how to connect with nature on lockdown. And we're joined by the brilliant Dr. Charlie Gardner. He is a doctor of wildlife conservation. He's also been involved with XR Scientists and is the author of Life Amongst Thorns. To introduce myself quickly, I'm not as academic as Charlie, but I'm a wildlife conservationist and wildlife activist here in the east of England. Like probably most of us wildlife conservationists, when this lockdown hit, especially in spring, it was a bit of a thorn in the side because we like to be outside doing field work, surveying wildlife. How are you coping, I guess, is the first question, Charlie.
Oh, blimey. It's been a bit of a change, hasn't it? To be honest, I'm in a really lucky position and I'm coping quite well. Lots of my, although I'm a conservationist, most of my work these days is research, so conservation science, rather than the actual practice of conserving biodiversity. So I've actually got a lot of work that I can do from home, which is great. Also, one of the great things about being a conservationist is that you get very used to spending lots of time on your own. And I'm a bit of a hermit anyway, so that's been really nice. Yeah, I've been able to enjoy lots of time at home. And actually, I'm really pleased that if it had to happen, then spring is a fantastic time for it to happen because I love the spring and I always wish I had more time to just sit and appreciate it, you know. And one of the fantastic things about spring is how much change is happening, how much everything's coming to life. But our normal lives are so busy. We're rushing to and from work, and you know, even when we're at home, even in our downtime, we feel we've got to be connected and online and doing something. So I just really enjoyed having an opportunity to just breathe a bit and slow down and enjoy what's going on outside. And thankfully for me, I live in a village, not in the city, so I can go out and get into wild spaces. And I've also got a nice garden, so nature has been by my side, seeing me through it, which has been wonderful. How about you? How have you been coping, Benjamin?
I've been managing again. I think that's one of the lovely things with it, with spring happening right now, is that for many of those individuals who do have those really busy lives, and obviously there are a lot of incredible people who are busy right now, but I feel it's an opportunity for a lot more people to go outside and appreciate nature, and for something to actually be there. If this happened in autumn or winter, we wouldn't be seeing as much wildlife as we are now. And it is really the exciting time. Everything's emerging, everything's coming out. So I guess to move on to the question or the topic is how can we connect to wildlife and nature on lockdown? What things can people expect to see at this time of the year, and especially during some of the restricted walks that we'll have, or maybe in their gardens if there's anyone fortunate enough to have a garden? What do you think we could expect to see at this time of year?
All sorts, really. I think, yeah, no matter what you're interested in, there is something happening right now. And it's a really exciting time of the year because things are coming to life. So because we live in such a seasonal environment, you know, we have cold winters and we have hot summers. So almost all the wildlife and plant life we have basically has to fit a whole year's worth of activity into the short period between spring and autumn when it's warm enough. So and now sort of March, April, May time is we start to see lots and lots of things becoming active. So you know, as I look outside my window now, the trees I can see, the birch trees and the ash trees and oaks, they're coming into leaf. There are all sorts of smaller sort of herbs, so not woody plants, but small plants which are either they're annuals, which means they just have a very short life cycle, so they're growing from seed now, or there are others which are longer lived, but they spend the winter dormant under the soil and they're just coming up now. So we've got all these plants coming into life, and then of course because of that we have all these insects which feed on the plants. So your pollinators, like your bees and butterflies, are all starting to emerge now as the flowers are out. It's also a really this is absolutely the best time for birds because they're really, really busy breeding. So lots of birds that are quite shy and difficult to see during other times of the year are quite obvious now because the males are singing, trying to attract a mate, establish a territory. And for some of the species that started breeding early, they've already got chicks now. And so now's a great time to see them because the adults are frantically busy trying to find as much food. So they're paying less attention to staying away from predators and hiding because their imperative now is to get enough food. So they're all very visible. It's also a really good time for birds because lots of our birds in Britain are migratory species. So they're only here for part of the year. And lots of our most beloved migrants like swallows and house martins are coming now. So I've probably not answered the question you wanted because I've not really talked about specific species that are coming, but I just find this the most magical time of year. And so I've been spending a lot of time watching the birds in my garden over the last few weeks, as I'm sure many of us have. And yes, it's been exciting to see unusual things. I think lots of people, so I follow quite a lot of people that are into birds on Twitter, and they're all going mad at the minute because the opportunity to just spend more time in your garden than you normally do means they're seeing lots of things. There's all sorts of exciting things flying over. About 3 days ago, I saw a honey buzzard fly over my garden so I live in a village just east of King's Lynn in West Norfolk. And I've never seen a honey buzzard before, and it was really exciting. So this is a summer migrant that spends the winter in southern Africa, and they do breed in a couple of places in Norfolk, but they're really, really rare in Britain. And they probably fly over my house every springtime, but of course I'm at work, and so I don't see them. So it's been really nice to see them. But apart from exciting things like that, I've just really enjoyed seeing common birds, birds that we're all familiar with, like blue tits and robins and wrens and blackbirds, doing exciting things because they're breeding now. And for me, the thing that really attracts me to birds, the thing I enjoy as a bird watcher is not collecting them and ticking new rare species that I've not seen before. What I enjoy is seeing them behave, seeing them go about carrying out their reproduction. And at the moment, because they're so busy, you catch glimpses of them and you can really see what they're doing. So, for example, when the lockdown started a few weeks back, the male birds in my garden were all singing. They're spending a lot of time singing because at the start of the spring, the first thing they have to do is establish a territory. They have to get a patch of good habitat and say, right, this is mine, you lot, out, this is mine. And they also have to attract a mate. They have to find a female that would like to reproduce with them. And many birds do that either by singing or by showing off their brilliant plumage. So a few weeks ago, I was watching all this courtship behavior. Then I noticed a lot of the birds were flying around the garden with little bits of vegetation in their mouth, bits of dead grass, sometimes bits of spider web or other feathers. And this is because they're building their nests. So we had this period of a couple of weeks of frantic nest building. Over the last couple of weeks, or the last few days even, we started to see the chicks are fledging. So there's been a few days where the birds have been flying about the garden with food in their beaks a lot, and that's been great. You don't often see a bird with food in its beak, because normally they will obviously eat it immediately. But at this time of the year, they're not interested in feeding themselves. They're taking the food back to their nest. So if you see a blackbird with a larva in its mouth, or a blue tit with green caterpillars, that's because they're taking it back to the nest. So I've been watching that for the last few days, and then now, just the last couple of days, I'm starting to see the chicks emerge, and they're out in the garden, and they're you can always tell the chicks, because at this time of year they're frantically making lots of noise. They're really, they've left the nest for the first time. They're exploring this big, wide world for the first time, and I think it's really scary for them. It would be for me. So they're making a lot of noise. They're just doing little cheep cheep sounds to call their parents. Where are you? Where are you? Don't leave me behind. So just in the space of 3 weeks or a month over this lockdown, we've seen the birds move from courtship behavior and trying to find a mate, to building their nests, to feeding their chicks, and now their chicks are out feeding themselves. And so it's been a fantastic time to be able to see this.
I think it is really fabulous when you know what to look for, and you can almost envision this play being carried out in the gardens or on the walks that we're on. And it was the same for me as someone that's had experience with insects, and specifically moths and butterflies. When I see my first butterfly every year, it's like seeing an old friend for the first time. Or like when you go to a party and you see an old friend, it's you again. When I see a brimstone, and it's the same thing. What a lot of people don't know is that butterflies are also territorial. And I could see butterflies establishing themselves in the garden. I could see brimstones and peacocks chasing each other around. It's actually really funny. You wouldn't see them in a garden. Well, it depends what garden you've got. But speckled woods are really territorial. They've actually flown up into my face before when I've walked through the woods and got on their patch of sunlight. And now we're seeing butterflies and moths laying their eggs, or they've laid their eggs, and now the caterpillars are emerging. I saw some caterpillars the other day. So it's really nice to try and see what you can spot. And a lot of these things, a lot of common species are out there. I mean, blackbirds, I've seen loads of blackbirds. So here in Cambridge, there's been loads of blackbirds singing. Lots of blue tits as well. Some of the butterflies you can see at this time of year, obviously brimstones, peacocks, admirals. They've got lists on butterfly conservation if you wanted to try and spot some of those species. But to go back to your point earlier, just being able to appreciate some of those common species like the blackbirds. I mean, when I was walking through Cambridge City, I could hear so many birds, woodpeckers, blackbirds, blue tits, and I was thinking, the birds almost seemed more active, and I was like, are they normally this active and I just can't hear them because there's so much stuff going on, because there's traffic, because there's people? Or is the lack of human activity at the moment, would you say that's causing birds to be more active? How are we seeing the lockdown and the coronavirus affecting wildlife?
Ooh, this is a big question. And of course, we don't know that much because we don't, no one's out there collecting data. So and it's difficult to know what's going on around the rest of the world too. I think your point about what we're seeing in our cities, I think it's a bit of both. It's like you said, certainly yeah, I've heard a lot of people saying that they're really noticing birds singing much more. And to be honest, I do think that's largely about the silence. That's not because they weren't singing before, it's just we couldn't hear them because of all the traffic noise. And it's possibly also, I think a large part of it is because we weren't listening. It's we didn't have the quiet, and you know, we just weren't chilled out enough to actually stop and listen. So I think it's with the bird song, I think it is partly that. But of course, yeah, I'm sure lots of us have seen videos online being shared from cities all around the world, and it's definitely the case that nature is coming back into the spaces we leave for it. As we vacate these spaces, nature will come back, and there are all sorts of examples of this. I've seen videos of wild boar strolling the streets of Barcelona and Bergamo. I've seen videos of coyotes in downtown San Francisco. There's I saw a picture of a rhino, an Indian rhino, walking through a town in Nepal. You know, it's also difficult seeing these videos online. It's also difficult to know what is genuinely now and what is a video. Yeah, there's so much fake news around, and yeah, I'm sure some of these videos were actually maybe recorded years ago. People just posting them now and say, yeah, this is the virus, this is the virus.
I saw the one of like the caribou wandering through like the streets. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't. No.
So many, and there's the dolphins in Venice, and I'm thinking it's nice to think that if you give nature the space, it will come. And some of it is, you know, the one of the wild boars, the one of like the wild boars playing in the fountains in Milan. And I'm just like, yeah, this is having some really adverse effects on wildlife. But what you were saying before about not being able to take the data and collect the data, I you know, looking at, you know, to kind of move on to another question, it's like, how is this affecting wildlife conservation? Obviously, this is a very critical time of year for collecting data. And like I said at the start of the stream, it almost pains me because I've been sitting inside mostly during autumn and winter and doing what work I can there. And now the spring's here and I'd be out surveying butterflies, surveying moths, and I can't really do that. I can do that in my garden. I can do that when I go on my walks. But do we know how this is affecting wildlife conservation regionally in the UK and around the globe?
I don't think we'll know really for years until people can go out and collect data now. In terms of conservation science and ecological science, you're right that there will be a big impact there. You know, we have these long-term data sets that based on data that's collected year after year after year, and because of that, we often have a really fantastic, really, really impressive understanding of the ecology of Britain and you know, Western industrialized countries. And that research is going to be disrupted. You know, lots of those long-term data sets will have just a big gap, a year's gap in them, which is really distressing. I think on a global level, I think in Britain we probably won't be too badly affected, but on a global level, I think this pandemic and the lockdown that's associated with it are going to be absolutely catastrophic for biodiversity worldwide, unfortunately. And I wrote something about this in on a site called the Conversation. So if you look up the Conversation, 2 days ago, I wrote an article about this. And I think it's going to be catastrophic for conservation for a number of reasons, but particularly in the tropical world. And that's because, you know, in our societies, in our industrialized societies, we're really lucky in that, yeah, we live in a welfare state and the government looks after us. So we have these social safety nets. So, you know, right now, the government is guaranteeing through their furlough scheme, they're guaranteeing 80% of the income of anyone that can't work. And that means, you know, if because of this disaster you find yourself unable to work, you've lost your source of income, then it's okay, the government is still going to look after you. In the majority world, in tropical developing countries where most biodiversity is, these are poor countries, and the government isn't able to look after its citizens that way. And what happens, so I lived for 10 years in Madagascar, and I carried out a lot of research on human nature interactions in Madagascar. And what I found there is that wildlife acts as a safety net. So, for example, yeah, most people that live in the countryside in Madagascar, they're farmers. They don't want to chop the forest. They don't want to hunt animals. They just want to farm. What happens with climate change is it's changing all the rainy season, so they can't farm anymore. So they lose their source of income. And when they have nothing else that they can do to earn any money, they head to the forest, because you can always find something in the forest that you can sell or eat. So if you've got nothing else, you can go there. And of course, you know, you don't need an education or a fancy degree. You might need an education to be able to get a job. You don't need an education to be able to exploit wildlife. Anyone can, you know, wield an axe. So my really big concern is that right now in countries around the world, there are millions of people that are losing their jobs or losing their sources of income. And we know that that there's a mass exodus from cities to rural areas. So people that live in cities, in tropical cities, are leaving to go back to, you know, the villages they grew up in their millions. But what are they going to do when they get there? They can't farm because all the best farmland is taken by everyone else. The government's not sending them a check. I think that they will depend more and more on the safety net of natural resources. They will go to the sea to fish, or go to the forest to exploit natural resources. So I'm sure that because of the economic downturn, there's going to be many, many more people exploiting wildlife than before. Now, at the same time, there's going to be much less surveillance and protection of that wildlife. Now, one of the biggest impacts of the pandemic on wildlife, I think, is going to be the end of the shutdown of tourism, the shutdown of wildlife tourism around the world, and especially in poor countries that are rich in wildlife. So, for example, take a protected area, take a park or a reserve in Southern Africa, in Botswana or Zimbabwe or somewhere. Now, imagine that you live next to that park. And you know, it's very easy for us to be really appreciative of elephants and lions and all the rest of it. But if you're a poor villager that lives next to a park, you have to pay some of the costs of living with those animals. Sometimes, you know, you might have an elephant that comes and raids your crops in the night, and that's your whole income for the year gone. Or you might, if you're a goat herder, you might have some jackals take some of your goats. And you know, lions and elephants kill people too. So people that live around parks have this sort of uneasy coexistence with these animals. But the reason that they tolerate these animals is because they get some income from tourism. It's because foreigners like us come and visit these places, spend money in hotels and stuff, pay park entrance fees, and some of that money, not enough of it, but some of that money goes back to the villagers that live around it. And because of that, because people, you know, receive some benefits from the wildlife, then they're prepared to tolerate and put up with it and you know, deal with the occasional crop raiding or whatever. What's happening now is people aren't visiting those parks anymore, so that income has dried up, and I'm really worried that people will still be happy to tolerate living with dangerous wildlife if they're not getting any financial benefit from it. So I'm really concerned, to be honest.
I think that's a very interesting angle, because I think the point of view that many people have is that due to this lockdown, the environment might benefit. And I mean, in terms of like planes not flying, they're one of the biggest contributors towards greenhouse gases. Yeah, that's the case. But with biodiversity, it's not the same. And I think especially within this country, what you were saying about individuals tolerating that wildlife because it can be disastrous if you're a farmer and so forth, or even be threatening. I mean, we're a country that really didn't tolerate wildlife. I mean, we're one of the, if not the most nature depleted country in the world. So it's a very interesting comparison to us. Okay, well, economically, the government's going to be able to support us potentially, but for those other countries that are more biodiverse but don't have that support, will be inflicted. And that's a really interesting point of view to have. I think, yeah, sorry.
So I just wanted to say a couple of other things about, so I don't want to be too negative. And I think there are other ways that I think the lockdown is going to really benefit biodiversity in our wildlife in Britain too. One of them is roadkill. So I don't know about you, but I see so many dead badgers on the roads when I'm driving about. Dead roe deer, dead badgers. All right, some of the things that are killed are not native species, like muntjac and pheasants and things. But you know, still nobody likes to see wild animals like dead on the road. And to be honest, I haven't read the research. There must be lots of research, but for some species, vehicle collisions are a major source of mortality. So, and especially I imagine in the springtime when you have youngsters that aren't so, you know,
adapted,
streetwise and savvy. So I think that's the case. Another thing that I've heard being said is, I don't know if you heard, but there's been a lot of talk amongst pet owners about whether cats can carry the virus, and even if they don't get sick themselves, they can possibly transmit it. And there's been some veterinary advice for people to keep their cats indoors. And honestly, there are few things that could be better for wildlife in Britain than cat owners keeping their cats indoors.
It's like, why are all these songbirds? There seems to be more songbirds appearing everywhere.
That's
I
it.
wonder
That's
why that is. And I mean, this is the thing. It's a really interesting, because I mean, I've done some work on invasive species which can do a lot of damage, whether it's like the red claw crayfish we have in this country or the American mink, and then like things like cats almost get overlooked sometimes. And I think just to go back to the point, everyone's like the worst. It's like the worst idea to talk badly about cats on the internet, I think. So, we love cats. Don't get us wrong. The big cats are great. But the what you were saying about the roadkill situation, because I mean, I know in Spain, they've got the lynx there, which are very endangered, I think critically endangered even, and roads actually fragment their territory. So it'd be really interesting to see what some of the data is supporting on like Eurasian wolves and the lynx, I think it's the Iberian lynx they have in Spain, because I know roads are a huge issue, and we might actually see badgers get a bit revitalized. Obviously the cull has been postponed, I believe, like the badger culls stopped, which was incredible news to hear. But a really interesting study I was reading last year was that badgers, like the badger road collisions started going up because of GPS becoming more accessible, because people were using roads that they wouldn't normally use. So there'd be these badgers and all these wildlife crossing through like these weaving roads throughout the countryside, and it would never be an issue. And then suddenly there was more roadkills by that. So I thought that was a really interesting comparison. And it would be interesting to see what data there is on road collisions. I mean, it might be, I don't know how we'd collect that data. But in terms of data collection, and this is something that I really wanted to talk to you about as a scientist, is that there is citizen science, and people can go outside and collect data for wildlife. And that's something people could really do right now. And every year, with butterfly conservation, we have the big butterfly count where we really urge people to go out and count butterflies. And I feel almost collecting data and understanding the animals that you need to collect data for is a really good way for people to connect with wildlife. There's many species that you have to have a lot of patience for to see, which you're not going to be able to see in your garden, and you're not going to be able to see on the restricted walks that we have. But there's others that are quite accessible, so like moths and butterflies. So I was going to talk about how you can survey butterflies if you get to know your butterflies a bit more and submit that data in. Another great way of another great animal to survey, and anyone that knows me knew it was going to get to this point in the chat, is moths. And I feel they're a really great way of connecting with nature, because you're bringing the nature to you. So many people know that moths are attracted to light, and you can do something called a light trap, or sometimes a moth trap, where moths will collect to a light source, and you can survey them, and you can actually submit that data to a data scheme, or I think to butterfly conservation. And there's the big moth data collection scheme that they have. I'll have to brush up on what the best link would be for the region in the east of England. Yeah, like that's a really great way. If someone, if you don't want to sit there for too long, is to do a moth trap, and you'll see these animals that you wouldn't normally see as well. No, you probably can't see a kingfisher in your garden, but there's wildlife in your garden that's always there, but you just never see it because obviously moths are quite nocturnal. And I just wondered if there was any other examples of data that, or surveys that people could do of quite common wildlife, or wildlife on their doorstep, or in their garden. Obviously, botanically, I was quite curious about that. I don't know if there's, I don't know if you're involved with citizen science, are you much, Charlie?
It's not an area that that I include in my research, but it's something that I'm really, really keen on promoting, and I think it's a wonderful thing to do for a number of reasons. One is obviously that as a scientist, you can get so much data. If you have 2 million people around the country all going into their gardens and counting butterflies, you can get a lot of data, and so you can do amazing things with that. But it's also wonderful for the point of view of the person that's doing it, the citizen scientist, because I don't know about you, but I just really like to have a purpose to my to my activities. And yeah, I love just chilling out in my garden and seeing stuff, but if I have a purpose, if I'm watching bees because I'm writing down data, and I know that data is going to be used for something, then it gives me this extra stimulus to do it. So the best known citizen science project in the UK is the Big Garden Birdwatch, which is managed by the RSPB. I think that happens in January though, so that's no good for us, although I think the results of it will be coming out soon. Was it the garden butterfly survey that you were talking about? Because butterfly conservation have the garden butterfly survey, which is a thing that happens over the course of the year. So just go on to gardenbutterflysurvey.org, and you can download an activity pack there. There's also the charity Plant Life has a citizen science thing called Every Flower Counts, which is coming up next month from 23rd to 31st of May. And what you do then is, what they're trying to do with that survey is work out how big the flower resource is for pollinators in the UK. So what they ask you to do there is count how many flowers are appearing in your lawn, and and you do a calculation to see how much nectar they're producing. And that I really like, because that's really clever, because not only are they collecting data, but I think it's sort of quite clever psychologically, because by asking you to count how many flowers you have in your lawn, that makes you want to have more flowers in your lawn, and then that makes you less likely to mow and less likely to use herbicides and things. Lawns are, we're starting to see British people are waking up to the ecological travesty that is lawns. And it's something that makes me and a lot of people really sad, because we have all this wonderful green space in cities, which could be a wonderful resource for insects and or pollinators and other insects. But most of the time it's not.
I feel like you brought up lawns on
Oh.
purpose. Yeah, I'm in Cambridge, with the Extinction Rebellion in Cambridge. Well, yes, lawns are monocultures, and they are not as anywhere near as biodiverse as a meadow or a woodland, and there's lots of lawns everywhere. So if there's anything we can do to let you carry on, is to turn our lawns into more spaces for wildlife. So sorry, I'll let you continue there, Joe. I thought that was quite a good segue.
If we have time, I would like to hear more about the Rebel for Life action in Cambridge in
Rebel for Justice.
Months back.
Yeah.
Because I was planning for so long to come and join you, and then I wasn't able to at the time, unfortunately. So I'd love to hear more about it, and particularly the Trinity College lawn action. But yes, we were talking about citizen science. So there's the Garden Butterfly Survey and Every Flower Counts. The Natural History Museum have a whole bunch of different citizen science things on their website, so go there. I did note some others, hang on. There is the Woodland Trust have a citizen science project called Nature's Calendar, which is about recording when the different leaves, the different trees are coming into leaf and coming into bud, coming into flower at different times of the year. And this is really important data, because so the science of seasonality in the plant and animal kingdoms is called phenology. And keeping track of phenology is really important, because phenology changes with climate change. And we will all have noticed spring is getting earlier every year. Butterflies turn up earlier, birds start singing earlier, the trees start coming into leaf earlier. And so phenology, so the study of the seasonality, is a science that actually started in the East of England region in Norfolk. There was a cleric in the 1800s called Robert Marsham. He lived in a little village north of Norwich, and every year for 60 years he recorded the first signs of spring. So the first time he heard a cuckoo, when the oak leaves start coming out and stuff. And so we have these data from 200 years ago, and thanks to those data we know that spring is happening several days earlier in the UK than it used to happen. And so one of the things that the Woodland Trust are doing with this Nature's Calendar is trying to expand these data sets. And of course, if you have people submitting their data from all over the country, you can get really nice detailed understanding of what's happening around the country. So that's great. You'll like this one, there's a moth survey that's managed by, so one of the government research centres is called the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, CEH, and they have an app called Moths, What's Flying Tonight? And basically they ask you to submit the data from, if you do any moth trapping at home, you submit your data to Centre for Ecology and Hydrology on this app. And that's really useful data in two ways. One is the phenological aspect. You know, it's useful to know how climate change is affecting when these species are emerging or not. But the other is the spatial aspect. In the you know, if lots of people in lots of gardens around the country are doing moth trapping and submitting their data, then that gives us a really detailed understanding of where these species live. And that's important because if you know where species live and how many of them there are, then over time that allows you to detect changes. We call that monitoring. And monitoring is really important because, you know, if you're not paying attention to how many moths there are, then how are you going to notice when they disappear? And how are you going to react to the disappearance? And this is a huge problem in the UK. We have seen massive declines in our insects. Moths, yes, but bees and other pollinators in particular. And the main reason for that is because of our agriculture, because of the way we farm. We just use far too many chemicals. We douse everything with insecticides and basically we try and kill everything because we're under the impression that that's the best way to produce food. And it's only because of these long-term data sets that we know why this is happening. But at the minute, we don't have very many of these long-term data sets. So for example, last year, there was, 2 years ago now, in fact, there was a very famous paper that was published out of Germany that said that there's been 70% decline in insects or 80% decline in just 30 years. And that data made a splash, that paper made a splash in the media because it was the first time we'd really heard that, because there are not many places where people have been collecting insects for 30 years. What's great about citizen science is that many people are doing it. So 10, and I've been doing it for 10 years already, but in 10 years down the line or 20 years down the line, it won't be rare to have, we'll have data from every town in the country because people like you submitting your moths data, and people like hopefully all the rebels listening tonight.
All the rebels that are now going to be surveying wildlife, hopefully.
Absolutely, get out there. This is really important.
Now is the time of year.
Just one more quickly. There is a European ladybird app. If you just type European ladybird app on Ecosia, not Google, obviously, because Ecosia is a search engine that plants trees and isn't evil. They pay their taxes and everything. But yeah, if you type in European ladybird app on your search engine, your ethical search engine of choice, you'll find that. There is also the UK pollinator monitoring scheme, which will collect data on bees and butterflies and things. And so that was another point I wanted to make, actually, about one of the things that can be off-putting for people and stop people joining these citizen science things is that identifying things can be daunting. If you're just starting on your wildlife journey and you don't know very many species, the bewildering diversity of species can be really daunting. You think, I can't do this because I'm not going to be able to tell that bumblebee from that bumblebee. And this is where the internet really comes into its own. So there are a whole bunch of specialist websites where you can submit your photos of a moth or whatever, and there will be all these moth experts sitting at home identifying people's photos. There's nothing that hardcore wildlife nerds like more than identifying mystery photos. And there are all these websites. One of them is called iNaturalist. One of them is called, oops, I've lost it now. Damn, I've lost it. There's another one called iRecord. Um, but also Twitter or Facebook. You know, there are if you want to identify a particular type of hoverfly that you photographed in your garden yesterday, I bet you can go on Facebook and you can find a UK hoverfly group, post your hoverfly pictures, and there will be people at home that will be delighted to tell you what it is. So
just to interrupt you there, Charlie, I just thought I'd let anyone watching the stream know, if you have any questions that you'd like Charlie or myself to answer, please whack them in the Facebook chat or tweet them to us at East of England. We're 45 minutes now into the stream, so I just thought we can start lining up some questions because we've got a few coming through. Charlie, please continue with your hoverfly Facebook
and
chat.
Then but also, so we were talking about why spring is such a wonderful time to be in lockdown. Spring is a fantastic time to start learning species, to start learning how to identify the things you're interested in. Because of what I was saying before about seasonality, not everything starts at the same time. So if you're daunted by, you know, the huge variety of different birds or the huge variety of different butterflies we have, spring is a really good time because they start getting busy one by one. So you can learn the first species. The first bumblebee to turn up might be a couple of days before the next species. So you'll have a couple of days to learn it before you move on to the next one. The same with learning birdsong. So with birds, one of the best ways to appreciate birds, and particularly one of the best ways to identify them, is by learning their songs and learning their calls. And spring is a great time to do that because some start singing before others. And the same with butterflies. So you mentioned the brimstone. So yeah, brimstone was the first one that I saw here too. And then I've seen peacocks and commas and orange tips the last few days, but they're all coming a couple of days after each other, so you have time to get used to it.
Yeah.
If you're daunted by the idea of starting to learn birds, I think butterflies and bumblebees are both really great things to start your wildlife identification journey on, because there just aren't that many of them. So, you know, in my garden in Norfolk, yeah, I've probably have 50 species of birds coming in now and again. And in Norfolk, there are 350 species of birds. So that could be really daunting. But with bumblebees, I think we only have 24 species of bumblebee in the whole of the UK. And butterflies, we have 50 something, of which 57,
yeah.
is it?
Okay. I think it's 50. I think it's 57.
But not that many of them are going to be really common. So it's not such a daunting thing. You know, you can it's achievable to get to know them. And so they're good things to start with.
I do think that. I mean, with the bumblebees, I mean, there's the common bumblebee. What is it? Bombus terrestrius. Is that the most common one?
Sorry, I don't know about bumblebees.
The buff-tailed bumblebee is the one that's the big stripy and yellow one, black and yellow one. And then with butterflies, there's only 59. It is 59 species of butterfly, and they're very easy to tell the difference from. I guess if you're someone like us, but still, like, they have the patterns. Once you see them and you look at them up close, they're very, very different. Unlike compared to moths, where there's like, I think, 16,000 different species of moth in the UK. So start with butterflies. Yeah, start with butterflies, because you have all the micro moths. I believe it's that. And the other thing is with moths, I'm sorry, this has just turned into a moth live stream, is that you get day flying moths as well. There's moths that fly during the day. So you probably know about, like, the six-spot burnet moth, the cinnabar moths, really beautiful, see them in meadows all the time. But yeah, no, I think there are species that are very easy to identify, and I can understand it can seem a bit intimidating sometimes. And I think one of the things about this lockdown is that, like we said at the start, people have more time for wildlife. Many of us, unfortunately, are quite disenfranchised from wildlife. We do have very busy lifestyles, and I think now is a great time than ever to take a step back and think, oh, well, maybe when I go on this walk, I'm going to try and identify this species of bumblebee, like you were saying, or so forth. You've done a lot of work in Madagascar, and that really is a country that, you know, when I was younger, when I envisioned Madagascar, I literally just envisioned this desert island that had an endless, you know, wildlife, a big, massive jungle. But it's really, a lot has disappeared in Madagascar. Do you think, compared to Madagascar, comparing Madagascar to the UK, the UK is very nature depleted, which we'll get onto later. But do you think, how close do you think they both are to the biodiversity they have? Because I thought this would be really intriguing to ask you specifically with your work with WWF Madagascar. Do you think, because we always see that Madagascar is this place that has all this incredible endemic wildlife, but I think these days it's you know, like you were mentioning, overfishing happens and so forth. I'll let you continue, but I wonder what your thoughts would be on that.
So yeah, the wildlife of Madagascar is in trouble for a number of reasons, but mainly, to be honest, it's about poverty. So Madagascar is the poorest country on earth. There was an analysis by the World Bank last year, and it's literally bottom of the table. It's the poorest country in the world, and because of that, you know, because of that, people are much more heavily dependent on biodiversity and on ecosystems than people in our countries are. So, so yes, our country in Britain, we're heavily wildlife depleted, but most of our wildlife was already lost a long time ago. And apart from, yes, we still have, you know, HS2, and we still have roads being built, and we still have houses being built on fields and stuff. But the big difference is, in this country, we get our food from a shop. Whereas if you're a Malagasy person living in rural Madagascar, you get your food from the land. And that means if you don't have any food, if the rains didn't come this year, or if there was a big storm that destroyed your crop or whatever, then you know you don't have money. There's nowhere you can go. There's nothing else you can do except go to the ocean to fish, or head into the forest to chop down a tree to sell, or to find some birds you can shoot to eat. So the people are much more dependent on, you know, ecosystems for their survival and for their income, and because of that, the biodiversity is still being lost really, really rapidly. There's still a lot of deforestation. So yes, Britain has lost most of its wildlife, but we've sort of bottomed out. You know, we've been going down this steep slope of decline for hundreds of years, and we're at the bottom now, whereas Madagascar is still going down very, very fast. And I've completely forgotten my other point. Oh no, I haven't. I've remembered. Okay. So, the other difference between Britain and Madagascar is that Madagascar used to be almost entirely forest. And that means all the wildlife in Madagascar is adapted to living in forests. Whereas in Britain, we have wildlife that lives in forests, but we have wildlife that lives in grasslands, we have wildlife that lives in open areas, and that's the same on most continents. So, you know, in Africa, you've got rainforests, you've got savannas. And so what that means is, if you have a forest and you clear that forest, then, and you convert it into grassland or pastures or something, then yes, you'll have lost all the forest wildlife, but you'll get other wildlife in its place. The forest disappears, forest wildlife disappears, but the grassland wildlife will come in. So when you get deforestation or habitat destruction, you get a change in the wildlife, but you don't get a total disappearance of all wildlife. But in Madagascar, almost everything lives in a forest. So when the forest is gone, there is literally nothing left. So, you know, I take the train down to Kent quite a lot because I work at University of Kent. And sometimes when I'm too distracted and struggling for work, I just sit outside the window, and none of what I'm looking at is good wildlife habitat. It's all agricultural fields, but I would still see lots and lots of birds out the train window. In Madagascar, you just don't see that. Once the forest is gone, you see nothing. So you can drive for hours and hours and hours between cities, and you literally will not see a single bird. Imagine that, driving for 3 hours and not seeing a single bird. It's tragic.
That's a really interesting thing to kind of envision, because I think we're so used to, I mean, even in some of the most urbanized areas, still seeing wildlife, and that's why we're kind of quite fortunate, especially those of us that live in cities or urbanized areas, that we will still see things, that we can find wildlife on our doorstep, and we're able to appreciate that. I was going to say, it's coming up to an hour. I didn't know if you'd want to like have a quick break or get a glass of water or something. I was going to go get some more water from the kitchen.
Yeah, I need a wee actually, so I'll see you in a minute.
Well, anyone that's watching the stream, we're going to be like 2 minutes, and then we'll be back to discuss more wildlife stuff. If there is anyone with a question, wildlife based, or that fits into some of the things that we've been discussing, please email them to us at xrtv.eoe@protonmail.com, or post them in the Facebook chat, or tweet them to us, and we'll try and get back to them. We're going to be on the stream for about another hour or so. I'm just going to go get some more water, and I'll be back in a minute. I should probably have like some sort of like "we'll be back" image, but I don't, so.
Just going to check the Facebook chat, see if anyone sent any questions. All the technical questions all the questions I can see are technical ones about how to get this on different websites or whatever.
I left my mug. Yeah, I left my cup in the kitchen. I was like, I'm going to go get some water. Where did I put it?
I'm only here to answer questions, and there's no questions, so I don't know what I'm going to do.
I've got some questions on the old email. Let me have a look. We've had it's kind of hard to know where to go next.
So there was something I wanted to say about what we were just chatting about before, actually, Benjamin.
Yeah, continue. So I just thought it's an hour, so good time to like
sure.
pause.
Yeah,
we were
talking about the wildlife that we see in our cities, or in our gardens in cities, and this was actually a bit of a surprise to me when I moved to the countryside. So I grew up in London, and because I was a city boy, I just always assumed that the countryside is where all the wildlife is. And then when I came back from living abroad for many years, a few years ago, I moved to Norfolk and now live in a village in Norfolk. And now I can really see that there is much more wildlife in general in gardens than there is in the countryside around me, because the countryside, as I said before, is just drenched in chemicals all the time by farmers growing their agricultural crops. I see so many more birds, and particularly so many more insects in my garden over spring and summer than I do when I go for a walk beyond my garden into the fields. And particularly insects. So pollinating insects, butterflies, bees, and hoverflies and things. They are 50 times more abundant in my garden than they are in the fields around it. And when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense, because farmers, pollinating insects like flowers, basically, whereas farmers don't want there to be lots of different plants in their field. They want there to be just one plant, the crops that they're growing. So obviously those fields can't support a diversity of insects, even if they weren't being drenched in insecticide. But our gardens are absolutely full of flowers. And as for a pollinator, flowers is what you're after. So while we think of our cities as not being a hotbed of wildlife because they're cities, that's not actually true. And in terms of insects, gardens are hugely, hugely important. And that means gardening is hugely important. It means we can actually make a big contribution to conservation. We can help our country's wildlife without leaving home, just by managing our gardens in a way that makes them attractive for wildlife. We talked a bit earlier about how terrible lawns are. Well, lawns are just deserts for wildlife. But if you converted some of your lawn into a flower bed and filled it with flowers, they don't even have to be native flowers, then you will suddenly be providing a resource that is very, very, very valuable. And there are a lot of things that we can do in our gardens to help wildlife. Would now be an all right time to chat about them? What do you think?
Yeah.
Should I chat about what we can do in our gardens for wildlife?
Well, I think that'll be a perfect topic to chat about, because I think there's a lot more people being able to garden at this point.
There's a lot of interest.
But what I was something that's really interesting about what you were saying, and this is something I moan about so much, about how we are a country of farmland, is that I was reading. So a lot of people, when they think about built like destroying habitat, right, they might automatically think to a Morrison's car park being built or something like that, the urbanization. But I don't know if you've read the recent State of Nature report, but there's a bit of information on that where it says if a residential area is being built on a brownfield, then that can actually be better for wildlife, because even though a tiny fraction of that land would be used for gardens, the gardens are a lot more biodiverse than what was there in the first place. And we're so used to thinking, oh, that pasture, that's wildlife, and it's not. That lawn, that's wildlife, and it's very few and far between what is I shouldn't use the word wildlife, but biodiverse. And I think it is really significant to wildlife if we can transform our gardens in a way that serves it. So I thought I'd let you continue to say how can we transform our gardens into more biodiverse places for wildlife?
Well, the single most important thing is plants. And I know that sounds silly, but you'd be amazed by how many people these days seem to think a garden doesn't need plants in it. The amount of when I'm walking along streets, the amount of front gardens that are just either completely paved over with slabs or just put under gravel or believe it or not, fake grass. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine forking out for plastic that looks like grass because you're too lazy to mow? Just unbelievable. So you know, one of the big drivers of the loss of wildlife in our towns has been people tearing up their gardens and putting paving slabs and gravel in there instead. So I know it sounds intuitive, but a garden with plants is a lot better than a garden without plants. Lawns, so lawns are probably proportionally the biggest feature of gardens in the UK, and having even if you want to keep your lawn, there are simple things you can do to improve its value. One is just reduce how much you mow. So if you mow, if you're the kind of person that mows every 2 weeks or something, just try mowing every 4 weeks or every 6 weeks instead. Or you can raise the level of the blades on your mower so that it doesn't cut right to the bottom when you're mowing, and that gives things like daisies and other small plants, speedwells and others, the chance to grow up. I've got a bit of a thing about mowing. It's my pet hate, actually, because every time it's sunny, every time you think, right, this will be a beautiful moment to go out and enjoy the garden, then some man in the neighborhood is going to think, right, this is the perfect time to start mowing the bloody lawn. And my peace is always destroyed by people mowing their lawns. So I don't like lawn mowing.
Don't get me started. Like where I was before, there was like someone that was building, this is got like a complete tangent, but they were building their own like shed / studio up the back of the garden, and it was like a year-long project. So he had like a workshop in his back garden, and me trying to enjoy the songbirds and so forth. It was like oh, now I'm in the fens where it's quiet. It's like, yeah, no, it's to anyone watching the stream, please don't make too much noise in your garden.
Thank you.
But that is a really good if you're not going to take part in citizen science surveys or any of the like, just yeah, I mean, we have to do our maintenance, but the tranquility is very lovely.
Here's a top tip for you. Instead of paying for a gym subscription and then using an electric mower, just use a non-electric mower, a push mower. Honestly, it'll get you so fit. That's what we mow with, and it's knackering. You don't need to waste money on paying to go to the gym. Just mow your lawn by hand.
I think the best. This is turned into a wildlife workout session. The best one for me is like bracken. Have you ever, how like invasive bracken is? So we've had to do bracken pulling to stop. So for those that don't know what bracken is, it's this plant that kind of looks like a fern, and it absolutely carpets all areas of the UK, sometimes woodlands, and because it's so invasive, it blocks. It sprouts up first and it blocks all the wildflowers, so there's none of those flowers pollinators. So when I've done work with the trusts, you have to pull them up by their roots, and doing that like every week is very good workout. So if you want to get a good workout, volunteer with your local wildlife organisation. Maybe it's the wildlife trusts, maybe it's RSPB. What do we have in Cambridge? We have the BCN, which is Bedfords, Cambridge and Northamptonshire.
That's right.
But the great thing about the Wildlife Trust is that they have regional groups. Right now, obviously, there's not much voluntary groups happening, but in the future, it's something to consider.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, I was just going to carry on with some tips for wildlife gardening, if that's all right, Benjamin.
Go ahead.
Right. I'm just going to go back to lawns because I'm passionate in my hatred of lawns.
So is Extinction Rebellion in Cambridge.
Oh, we know. Yeah, we'll come to that. Don't worry. If you're not prepared to leave your lawn unmowed, what you can do is just leave a very small patch of it unmowed, and lots of insects and things can use that. And in general, the best wildlife gardening tip is, it's my favorite because I'm also a very lazy gardener, is don't be too tidy. If you clear away all the dead and dying vegetation and weed out all the weeds and things, then you're taking away microhabitats for insects. So having a slightly untidy garden is really good, and it's excellent because if if your neighbors or your friends coming to visit look at you scornfully like you're a lazy gardener, you can just say, I'm not a lazy gardener, I'm a wildlife gardener. I'm doing it for the planet. Other than that, the most important thing is a three-dimensional structure. So having trees in gardens. There's a lot of research has been done on this, again, a citizen science thing, coming out of the University of Sheffield. So there were hundreds of people with gardeners in and around Sheffield volunteered to take part in this scheme. And they found the single biggest determinant of the diversity of insects and other invertebrates in your garden is whether or not there are trees. And they don't even have to be native trees. Native trees are preferable, but all sorts of trees will definitely provide structure. Another thing you can do is dig a pond. So ponds are obviously great for our amphibians, frogs and toads and newts. And they're one of the British habitats that has suffered the biggest decline. So in the old days, there were a lot of ponds. Every small farm used to have a pond. One of the big trends we've had is the consolidation of farms. All the small farms have been swallowed up into big ones. And as it's become more and more about producing as much of these commodities as possible, farmers have come to see ponds as a waste of space. Why keep that when I could just fill it in and plant more crops? So we've lost ponds, and we've had a massive decline of frogs and newts and toads and other things. Ponds can also be really good for other sorts of wildlife. They often attract dragonflies, and I don't know about you, but I love dragonflies. I don't know anything about them. I can't identify one. I don't know any species, but they are just super cool animals.
Yeah, I think something that with dragonflies, I'm going to go on about dragonflies a little bit. A lot of people think they primarily hang around ponds, but they don't always hang around ponds. They have territories all over the place. So you can see, your ruddy darters in the woodlands, emperor dragonflies, it's emperor dragonflies, yeah. They're the huge ones that you can see all over the place. I think it's emperor. I might be getting mixed up with emperor moths because I've got moths on the mind. Yeah, like the emperors, like you can see them all over the place. Another tip with dragonflies as well, and this is something that I found out from a really good wildlife filmmaker friend of mine, is that again, they're territorial, like butterflies, but they'll so if they've got a territory, and it's clear they've got a territory because they're flying around, they'll always look for a higher vantage point to hunt from. So they'll sit on the end of a piece of grass or a piece of twig, and then they'll dart off. And if you're trying to take a picture of one, and this is what I've done, if you can see it keeps landing on these kind of bits that are sticking out the ground. If you put something in that's taller than everything else, and you can focus on the end of that twig, you can get a really good focused shot, because they're really hard to take pictures of or film because they move so bloody quickly. So that's a really interesting way that you can interact with wildlife.
So you're saying it'll automatically perch on the highest bit there is in whatever spot?
It will either do that, or it will get curious. It will be like, what is this in my territory? And it might take a little bit of time, but in the end it will end up landing on it. And it's something really interesting that you can see, as long as you don't, you want to impale this twiggy down into an appropriate place. Make sure there's not like a water vole on the other end of the stick, but like it's a really interesting way of engaging with them. And like there are dragonflies, beautiful animals. I'll let you continue.
I just had a question from my friend Brenda. Hi, Brenda, from our Kings Lynn and West Norfolk group, who, in response to me talking about the value of trees, wanted to ask about the value of hedges.
Hedgerows.
I'm quite pleased to be able to answer this question, because we have just planted a hedge last year around the edge of our front garden, and it's all the saplings we planted are coming up now, which is really, really exciting. So yeah, hedges, exactly what I said before about why ponds have disappeared. The same thing has been happening with hedges, and it happened. The main driver of it was mechanization of agriculture. So we used to have very small farms, very small fields, and all these fields were bounded by hedges. Hedges were a way of demarcating land boundaries. As we mechanized and people started using tractors more and more in their farming, the sort of economics of farming changes. Once you have a tractor, you need really big fields, because tractors are unwieldy. They don't, you can't turn them around in small spaces and stuff. And so we've had a huge decline in hedges in our agricultural areas around the country. Less so in some parts, hilly areas in the southwest around Cornwall and Devon. I hear there's some areas that still have lovely old hedges. East of England is absolutely shocking for hedges, I'm afraid. Norfolk, Cambridgeshire, Lincolnshire.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the hedgerow situation with farms. I feel like there's so many like discussions where like it just turns into like rants about farming. But like it is, I mean, and this is the thing, like we're constantly told about plastics, climate change, pollution, all of these things, when we like farming and the way we eat is one of the most damaging ways to our biodiversity and our planet and our climate, that I feel kind of gets overlooked. But yeah, hedgerows, I mean, I'm not sure what it's like in the east of England. I've done some stuff up in Derbyshire, but I mean, I think the east of England is the most nature depleted region of the UK. A lot of farmland here. And I think are farmers still subsidised to cut their hedgerows? I can't remember. There's something like that. There's a lot of, and there's a way of, it's good to let them grow, but they're cut obviously if they overlap onto roads. But if you know, if they're cut in a way that exposes the central part of the hedge where there's birds nesting, it can have really catastrophic, you know, obviously it's not a safe place. It's not a refuge for a bird anymore. I mean, maybe you could follow on with more information about this, Charlie.
Well, you've just highlighted what the real value of hedges is, and it's the fact that they are so dense and tangled, which makes them a great place for supporting species that are wary of predators. You know, you never see a vole cross your lawn, because voles are very vulnerable. They're eaten by lots and lots of things. They're eaten by, you know, cats, dogs, and stoats, and weasels, and snakes, and kestrels, and owls, and all sorts of birds. So animals that are a common prey source like to be sheltered, and hedges do precisely that. They provide shelter, and for that same reason, they're really important for as nest sites for birds. You don't see a lot of birds' nests. You see a lot more birds than you do birds' nests, and that's obviously because the birds are taking great care to hide them as well as they can. And hedges are great for that. Mm-hmm. That reminds me, just talking about birds' nests, the other thing you can do for wildlife gardening, and this is also a really nice activity for children, is you can build nest boxes both for birds and for insects, for things like, you might have heard this term, bug hotels.
Hmm.
Lots of our bees, solitary bees in particular, and lots of our birds, like the tit family, they nest in holes in dead wood. But we don't have that many available nest spaces anymore because, again, it's because of this thing about tidying. You know, when trees die, we cut them down. And we don't have many old trees full of holes anymore. So the limiting factor for many bird species and many insect species isn't a lack of food or anything like that. It's that they can't find places to breed, and that is something we can do at home. We can build nest boxes, we can build bug hotels. There are lots and lots of resources for building bug hotels online. You'll find them, but I believe you have a particular expertise in bird boxes.
Yes, I say a somewhat expertise. I mean, just in the bird boxes that we made for birds like tits. So, Extinction Rebellion, Cambridge were exceptionally efficient at making 100 bird boxes this spring, which we put up around the city in Cambridge. And if you can get plywood and you have access to some tools, you can make bird boxes yourself. But yeah, I'll post a link to that in the chat. You can find it on RSPB. So yeah, and also there are some that we still have, but I think we made over 100 bird boxes. So I think we're going to try and get them out to people where we can, shipping them out there. So if there's anyone that would like a bird box local to Cambridge or the region, maybe hook you up with one. An Extinction Rebellion bird box decorated with Extinction Rebellion symbolism.
2, please.
2. Okay, let's go. This is just going to turn into like a bird box. If you like, subscribe and leave a comment, you have the chance of winning a bird box. Right, okay. I thought we'd get back to some of the questions in the chat, unless there was anything you wanted to continue with.
So someone on the chat has just made a point about you talked about hedges being mechanically I can't remember what the word is now, but they get absolutely hammered with these big mechanical trimmers.
Flailing? Yeah.
Flailing, that's it, yeah.
Flailing, yeah, flailing. It's when you've got the literally like there'll be like a tractor with a arm on the back of it, and it'll just be this huge mechanical arm that literally sweeps through. And they do it with ditches as well. It's called ditching, where they'll literally clear out all of this beautiful foliage that is the ditches that run around farms. All of this beautiful foliage that has grown out of these small brooks that run around farms, they clear them so the water can run off more easily because they get blocked. It's really horrible. There's literally this big nightmare looking blade just goes into the brook and just like churns it all out and spits it out the other end of this thing. And yeah, it's and I'm sure it doesn't just take up plants as well, probably a lot of the aquatic life in there, frogs, toads, newts, some of those insects. But yeah, sorry, I'll let you continue, Charlie. Were you going to talk about hedging more?
I just wanted to make that point quickly about flailing. Now, of course, now is the breeding season for birds, as I haven't stopped talking about, and birds are protected during the breeding season. It is illegal to disturb birds during the breeding season, and I'm seeing quite a lot of activity online, and I wonder if certain people are taking advantage of the lockdown, taking advantage of the fact that there's not a lot of people watching, taking advantage of the fact that the police are busy cracking down on sunbathers in the parks, to be flailing their hedges now while they shouldn't be doing that. And yeah, we were talking way earlier about the effects of the lockdown on conservation, and I think that's another one of them, is people that are up to no good taking advantage of the distraction to push through their things while no one's watching. And one one manifestation of that, I think, is farmers flailing when they shouldn't be. Another one, of course, is our government pushing through HS2. They, like, literally today, as we speak now, forests are being cut down in the UK by our government to build this bloody train line. And
it's I mean, this is something I was going to get onto, Charlie, especially with there's no one around to see these things. There's no one to properly survey these things happening. And it was like you were just saying about, you know, destroying a bird nest is an offence, and especially during breeding season. And that's what's happening at some of these locations where HS2 is still happening, like Crackley Wood, for example. I think it's still happening at Crackley Wood. And this is really disconcerting for me, right? You know, obviously Extinction Rebellion has put a lot of pressure on the government, as well as loads of other incredible movements, not just XR. I mean, Parliament have now announced a climate emergency. I'm hoping that they'll announce a biodiversity emergency. What with, you know, a climate emergency being announced, and Extinction Rebellion's second demand being whole biodiversity lost by 2025, which gets a little bit overlooked sometimes. But like it is very upsetting seeing the government almost committing wildlife offences and wildlife crimes. But I mean, there's construction workers at these sites as well, in close proximity. How is this still able to happen? How are these woodlands being able to chop down? Do you think it is a matter of the lockdown being taken advantage of? And how you know, people at RSPB have said, if you're seeing any wildlife crimes, you know, report them. If there's anyone around here near a HS2 site, be sure to, you know, keep an eye on things. Yeah. You know, there's many incredible people that are already as well, I should say.
I don't want to get too political, and obviously, you know, lots of people are stunned that HS2 is going ahead anyway at the minute, just because of the sheer cost of it. And you know, we are in an economic crisis now. We're in a pandemic. We need to look after people, not be spending £100 billion on the thing. But yeah, I mean, it's not to be too cynical, but it's an established part of the playbook, isn't it? While people are distracted, push through the thing. And I just, so we talk about it being illegal to destroy bird habitat, and yes, the government is breaking, or the government's contractors is breaking the government's own laws now. But I think it's just scandalous that, you know, that ancient semi-natural woodland is being destroyed. You know, whether birds are breeding in it or not, it's being destroyed. And I think we have a real, it's not an area I know a huge amount about, but we have a real gap in our legislation, because lots of our wildlife legislation doesn't stop developers from destroying habitat. It obliges them to replace that habitat. So it says, okay, you can destroy that forest, but you have to offset it by making a new forest. The thing is, yes, you can plant trees. You cannot make an ancient woodland. It's impossible. Yeah, we can send a man to the moon. We'll be able to send a man or a woman to Mars soon, but we cannot create an ancient woodland. You can't. The only thing that will allow you to do that is hundreds of years of time. And so we have this ridiculous situation where the law allows developers to destroy ancient woodland as long as they replace it by planting trees. So what the law is saying is, as far as I understand it, is that, you know, that 300-year-old oak, which is habitat for X species, can be replaced by that 3-month-old oak, and that's equivalent. That's the same. And so we're seeing this right now in the east of England. There's a big fight going on around Norwich in the Wensum Valley, Norwich City Council, Norfolk County Council are pushing through this road, the Western Link Road. And one of the big issues, I mean, there's a million issues. No one wants to see this habitat destroyed. But in terms of legality, one of the big legal reasons why this habitat shouldn't be cleared is there's a particular species of bat. Well, there are several species of bat, but there's one that only nests in holes in really ancient trees. And the developers are like, no, it's fine. We've replaced those trees. We planted X thousand oaks over there. But if you're a bat, what that needs a hole in a 300-year oak to roost in or breed in, what use is a 3-month-old oak sapling to you? So I think this aspect of our legislation really has to be changed. You know, we live in such crisis times now, on such a fragile and, as you say, nature depleted planet. More and more, you know, we're realizing just how important nature is to us, not just for the maintenance of biodiversity, not just for the fight against climate change, but for our well-being as individuals. Nature makes us happy. Nature makes us healthy. There's all sorts of evidence about this. You know, people that are in a hospital ward who can see a tree out of their window, they recover faster than people that can't see a tree out of our window. Nature affects our health. And we can't just keep on accepting to have it destroyed for more and more roads, more and more houses. But unfortunately, our legislation allows that. And I think that's, you know, we talked about the ecological crisis sometimes playing second fiddle to the climate crisis in our rebellion. And I'm hoping that's something we can do something about, because they are equally as bad as each other, these two crises, and equally as important as each other.
Yeah, I think I one of the things that I'm always confronted by as someone, you know, primarily as a wildlife activist, and you probably get the same thing sometimes, Charlie, is that especially with me and my like obsession with moths, and a lot of people say, oh, they're brown and boring, why are they important? All they do is fly around my lamp at night and annoy me. And you know, I could reel off the reasons why moths are important, how they're an important food source for species like bats, which we were just talking about, and so forth. Everything's here for a reason. You know, these things aren't just here randomly. But I feel sometimes a bit frustrated by the fact that I'm almost making an excuse sometimes, like, why is this important? I'm like, well, and I lead off, you know, on all its utilities. But I think I just want to turn around and go, well, isn't it nice? Isn't it a nice thing to have? You know, like, I don't think I'd want to go in my garden and just have concrete or astroturf. Arguably some people do, which is a conversation for a whole other live stream. But this is the thing. I think it needs to be, and you've spoken about this before, about how we need to be really expressing nature for its, fighting nature purely for its, our connection to it. And for me, it's a right that people, the freedom of being able to engage with wildlife is a right that more and more people, it's something that people, more and more people are distancing themselves from. There are more people that are disenfranchised from wildlife, but it's almost a right that they don't know that they're losing. So that's the reason why, you know, I'm an activist for the ecological aspects and the fact that it's our life support system, but because it's lovely.
Yeah.
And I think I mean to answer, I don't know if you've got any more, if you want to lead on from that, Charlie. I thought we'd try and get back to some questions in the chat. But let me have a look. Someone had a really good question. Are there any species that are particular to east of England or more prevalent here than in the rest of the UK? From Brenda Kent. And I mean, I could talk about this for a bit, but Charlie, I'll let you go ahead first.
I was going to say I had hoped that that question had scrolled past without being picked up on, because I don't know how to answer. Right, talking about butterflies. So one of Britain's rarest butterflies exists only in the east of England. It's actually no good for seeing in your garden. But the swallowtail butterfly, look it up on your favourite ethical search engine, and it's massive, it's absolutely spectacular, and it basically exists only in the Norfolk Broads. So, and this is a subspecies, so which is different from the subspecies in mainland Europe. This is a subspecies which exists only in Britain, and in Britain it exists only in the Norfolk Broads. So basically we have a whole subspecies of butterfly that exists only in the Norfolk Broads.
Sorry, Charlie, do you just want to explain what a subspecies is? So to the fact that that subspecies in Europe could not mate with the subspecies in the UK, kind of thing.
To be honest, it's a bit arbitrary where we draw the line between different populations of animals and say, all right, those two are different species. And I don't want to go into it too much for that reason, but basically a subspecies is just when, a scientist who is interested in how to divide up life into these different units that we call species, they're called a taxonomist. And basically when taxonomists are persuaded that these two things are different, but they're not so different that they're definitely different species and they couldn't breed together, then they just say it's a subspecies. But it's, these things are not, these are, when we apply words like species or subspecies, these distinctions don't exist in nature. These are artifacts of our culture. These are about how human beings decide to split up and name things, not about how nature itself sees itself most of the time. So, but yeah, this particular swallowtail butterfly exists only in the Norfolk Broads. I'll let you answer the rest of that, or speak more about specialities in the east.
Yeah, well, I mean, the east of England has some of the warmest regions in the UK. In Essex, I believe the warmest temperature ever recorded in the UK was in Essex. So we see a lot of interesting species. I believe, I'll have to fact check that, but I believe that's a fact that I saw. It could be wrong though, but it still gets very warm compared to some of the places up north. So we see a lot of animals that like weather like that. In particular, I mean, a lot of butterfly species. I mean, I see loads of some of those migratory butterflies. There are other animals apart from butterflies, just to everyone know. But some of those migratory butterflies, like the clouded yellows, the painted ladies, I always see kind of first within the east of England. They're really lovely. The east of England's also probably one of the better spots to see some of our rarest mammals, like the water vole. So you can see water voles. You'll be able to see them a lot better than you would do in somewhere like Devon. I think they're almost completely extinct in Devon, even not extinct. And the water voles are probably one of the most endangered mammals in the UK. There's so many species that I can think of, but I'm trying to think: are they particularly endemic to the region, or is there ones that are particularly common here? I mean, I'm thinking about anything that might be crossing over from the Channel, from mainland Europe.
Struggling to think, to be honest.
It's like with England, and we can't.
We might not have that many sort of species that are really characteristic of our region. What we do have is some of the best wildlife sites in the whole country, and the coastlines of East Anglia in particular have some really magnificent bird reserves. So Norfolk is often seen as perhaps the wildlifeiest county in the UK. Lots of the rural economy in Norfolk is based around wildlife tourism and bird watchers and other types of wildlife lovers. Lots and lots of people come to Norfolk and Suffolk bird watching. They visit from all over the country and visit from all over Europe too. So the North Norfolk coast is home to some really world famous reserves, places like Titchwell and Cley. There is a Minsmere in Suffolk that's well known.
Yeah, Minsmere.
Some of the Wash is a hugely important area for wading birds, particularly in winter. So the Wash is a huge area of a huge intertidal area. So at low tide, there is lots and lots of exposed mud, which is just perfect habitat for wading birds. So we have some huge concentrations of wading birds over the winter. If you go to Snettisham Reserve at a high tide in winter, and you see all the tens of thousands of waders all roosting together and then taking off and flying together. I think that must be the most spectacular wildlife site anywhere in the UK. It's absolutely magnificent. In the Fens, there's a place called Welney, between where you and I are currently sat, Benjamin. And Welney is hugely important for swans, migratory swans, so hooper swans and Buick swans, which breed in the Arctic, in Iceland or northern Scandinavia, or even Siberia in the summer. And then in the winter, they come to Britain. And a huge, a big part of the whole world population of these species is just concentrated at a couple of sites. Another thing we get in Norfolk is lots of wild geese. So we have a species called the pink-footed goose, which again breeds in Iceland or somewhere up north. It comes here in winter. And half the whole world population or more can be found on the coast of Norfolk. So those are probably some of our well-known species for bird watchers.
Mm. And then we've got the Brent geese, which I wouldn't say particularly you get them in the east of England, but they're all over the place.
Mark Dimmock has just pointed out one, which is the crane, the common crane. So this is a species that used to be part of our native bird life in Britain, but it went extinct over the course of the centuries for a couple of reasons. One, I think, is wetland drainage. So the drainage of the fens, converting the fens from what was one of Europe's most spectacular wetlands to what it is today, this agricultural land. And cranes are magnificent birds, huge, really tall, and they used to be hunted too. Big birds tends to disappear from places first because you get a lot of meat from a big bird. There's a lot of food on a crane compared to a quail. So they disappeared. They have come back to the UK over the last couple of decades. And there are a couple of sites in the Norfolk Broads where they're breeding. And I think there's a few sites across Norfolk. I'm hoping Mark will perhaps come back on to the chat and tell us where we can find cranes. But so when you invited me onto this show, Benjamin, and told me the theme would be about connecting with nature, I tried to crowdsource some information from members of our local Kings Lynn and West Norfolk group, and my friend Rob pointed out that just lying on your back in the garden and watching the birds flying over is a great thing to do during lockdown, because you'd be surprised at how much you can actually see flying over your garden if you're actually looking. And Rob lives in central Kings Lynn, and last week he saw a crane fly over his garden, which would just be amazing.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that is so beautiful about wildlife is that things just appear where you wouldn't expect them to sometimes. It's when so for example, one of my favorite things to go and look for towards the end of this month, this time of year, and especially more in towards the summer, is orchids. The orchids start coming out, and we have some really magnificent orchids in the UK. We have our bee orchids, we have our purple spotted orchids, really lovely flowers, and there's some really rare ones that have some really fascinating kind of petal anatomy. There's like the I don't know if you've ever seen a man orchid, and the petals literally look like little stick men. And but they're so where they decide to grow is kind of so sporadic. They won't grow in the same places every year like other flowers do. Some will, but I've been on walks before, and we don't have tons of orchid species in the UK, so that's a really lovely thing that you can go out and look for. Like you were saying earlier about giving your wildlife transect a bit of purpose rather than just kind of, you know, walking out there and seeing what you can find. But I've seen orchids pop up in random places. I mean, they need very specific soil conditions. So that's one example that I'd like to give of just how, you know, how surprising wildlife can be, and how wildlife can return and bounce back in magnificent ways. And you can see things in your garden that you wouldn't normally see if you were in your garden long enough. Hedgehogs, they're an animal that people would love to see more of, and they don't. But sometimes people don't know if they've even got hedgehogs in their gardens. One of the things that I've really struggled with at this time of year, and apologies for bringing it back to the moth conversation again, but emperor moths are the only saturnid moths in the UK, and they're absolutely stunning. They are these beautiful moths that only fly for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They don't feed, they emerge and they mate, and the caterpillars eat, and then they overwinter in their cocoons underground. And they only fly for about, maybe at you know, throughout the UK, maybe at most a month. This region of the UK, I've only found them to really have a flight period for about 2 weeks. And I've been on lockdown when I normally go out to look for these moths, so I've been very frustrated. But these moths aren't rare. I'm trying to think. I think there's one on here. That's what they look like. Really beautiful.
Wow.
And they're really huge as well compared to like some of the other moths. And yeah, like that's not brown and boring. Look at that. I mean, and they fly during the day as well. You can survey them during the day. They don't primarily come out at night. They actually I think I've seen them most flying in the evenings. And you could, they're not rare. They're widespread across the UK, but they just appear in the most random places. Like, you could be the most enthusiastic person about this moth, and like me, and not see it in your back garden. But then the person next to you that doesn't know the difference between, you know, a moth and a pterodactyl, there could be one perched right on their windowsill. And that's the case with some of these animals. You could be one of those lucky people that sees a treat like that in your back garden. And I think it's really lovely to kind of know what you're seeing sometimes. But I think if you see something like that, you're like, that's not really a normal thing to see. So you can see some really incredible species in your back garden, not just some of those common ones as well. I don't know what some other examples of that would be. I saw a red kite over my garden once. That was absolutely great. That's one of those birds that you can lay down on your back and look at the sky and just see the silhouette of a red kite and know it's a red kite. It has that forked tail. That's another great example. It would be even more incredible to see a crane, albeit. But yeah, I think there's so many things that are great to see. I don't know if you've got any more examples, Charlie. If not, I thought we'd move on to some other questions.
Yeah, well, we've not got a huge amount of time left, actually,
Yeah,
tragically. Yeah, just to say, you hit upon, you know, the main thing for that you have to do to see exciting things, and it's just be out there. You never know what you're going to see in what wildlife you're going to come across, and you don't have to go to famous nature reserves to see wildlife. Wildlife is everywhere. If we don't see it most of the time, it's because we're not looking. It's because we're indoors, not outdoors. Or if we're walking along, we're too busy trying to not get hit by a car, so we don't have time to look at things. And that really is the wonderful silver lining about this pandemic, I think, for many of us, is that it is giving us the gift of time so we can just get out there and enjoy being out there. And you know, we do, as you say, we are a nature depleted country, but you know, we've not lost everything. We do still have a lot of wonderful, wonderful things. And it's just a case of spending time outdoors, and you never know what you might see.
yeah, and I think that's a great place to kind of leave things. That, you know, the overarching topic was how to connect with nature on lockdown, and obviously we've gone into some really interesting discussions over the course of 2 hours. Like, I can't thank you enough, Charlie.
It's flown there.
It's flown. I mean, if you're wildlife conservationists like us, you could chat about wildlife all day, which I will probably end up doing in isolation, just standing in the mirror. Yeah, if you are looking to trying to get to know wildlife more because you have that time or you have that space. I mean, I know there's some people that don't have gardens, that do live in urbanized areas, but you know, maybe many of us go for a run or we go for a walk and we don't just stop to look at something. And I think it is about taking a moment to just stop, look at some flowers, look at, you know, even maybe a meadow that you might walk past. I mean, for example, I'm very fortunate to be living in the Fens, and I walk through the Fens every now and again and see some really lovely things. But if you stop and you see something and you don't know what it is, maybe go back, try and figure out what it is, and then try and see it again the next day. And yeah, and I think the best way, and you know, one of the best ways that we can help our wildlife is to understand it. To understand it is to care for it. To care for it is to love it. Or was it to understand it is to appreciate it? To appreciate it is to care for it. To care for it is to love it.
It all works.
That's, yeah. I think I'm not a poet. I'm a wildlife conservationist. I think there's some questions that we didn't get back to on the chat that I'm just looking at. There was one about farming, but I think we ranted on about farming for long. If you really want the questions answered, then feel free to email the Proton email that we have.
Maybe we could do this. Sorry to interrupt, Benjamin. Maybe we could do this again one day.
I'd love to do this again. I mean, to anyone watching the stream, we've literally only just set up East of England TV. If you would like to get involved with East of England TV, or contribute even, we've got a submission form, we've got an email. We're kind of taking slow steps towards getting this set up properly. Or if you would like to see our schedule, we're going to be getting a schedule out soon with some other content. We're planning to do a discussion every Thursday at some time between 6 and 10 p.m. So do come in and tune in next week at this time as well, because we'll have another discussion, usually something to do with the environment, whether it's climate change, wildlife related, Extinction Rebellion related. But yeah, if you want to ask questions or get involved, please follow the social media that we've got: our Instagram, our Twitter, and our Facebook. We'll have a web page up soon for all of that. And yeah, tune in every week, and I'm sure we'll have this discussion again sometime in the future, Charlie. It's been a really lovely pilot episode of East of England TV. Thank you for joining our very first live stream. And if you do have any more questions for Charlie, do email them in or ask them on Twitter. Your handle is Charlie J Gardner that's your Twitter, at Charlie J Gardner on Twitter. Give him some tweets. What a great platform, Twitter. I almost want it to be primarily about bird watching, given the name. Okay, that was an awful joke. Let's not end the live stream on an awful joke. I think we might do. I don't know how else to wrap this up. I'm just like, this is the first time that I'm doing this, and I'm like, okay. I think if you would like to get more involved with wildlife, there are incredible wildlife organisations like RSPB, the Wildlife Trust, who provide really great information and activities. I think they're doing their own TV stuff now things are on lockdown. But there we go. I think it's time to...
Benjamin, before you go, before you log off, can I please just extend our thanks on behalf of everyone that was watching, extend our thanks to you for making this happen. It's fantastic. It's a wonderful resource. The thousands of viewers have been kept thoroughly entertained, and yeah, you've done an amazing job. Big up yourself. Well done.
No, I mean, it's been really, everyone's clapping. I thought it was for what you just, I thought it was clapping in appreciation for me, but then
no, they're clapping you.
The NHS is very important, but this live stream was also a big accomplishment. Yeah, no, it's been really great to be able to sort this out, and we do want to grow this. So, like, I can't stress it enough. Please do keep track, because we're going to be trying to, you know, like add more to this as time goes on. But anyway, we'll let everyone go and have their clap. Charlie, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone. Thanks, Charlie, for sitting with us for 2 hours, and all the viewers that have sat with us for 2 hours. And do tune in next time. So, to everyone watching, a huge thank you from myself, Charlie, and Extinction Rebellion East of England. And till the next time. Oh, and I must add, if you want to watch this again, or if you didn't manage to catch the whole thing, it will be uploaded to our East of England YouTube channel, which is XR TV EoE on YouTube, and there'll be links to that on our social media. But thanks again. Get out there, see some of that springtime wildlife, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks, guys.